the woman standing in the dusty street with nothing but a worn carpet bag, and her beloved Singer sewing machine looked like she might cry. But Dolores Bradford had learned long ago that tears solved nothing in this harsh frontier town of Lyndon, Kansas, in the scorching summer of 1878. The landlord, a portly man named Horace Mendel with a face as red as a tomato, stood on the wooden sidewalk with his arms crossed, watching as two hired men carried the last of her meager belongings from the small room above the general store where she had lived and worked for the past 3 years. The sewing machine sat on the ground beside her, its black metal gleaming in the relentless sun, and she placed a protective hand on it as if it might somehow grow legs and walk away. "I told you 2 weeks ago, Miss Bradford," Horace said, his voice carrying that particular tone of satisfaction some men got when exercising power over those who had none. "The rent was due. You cannot expect me to run a charity." "I was short by $3, Dolores said, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. $3, Mr. Mendel. I had a dress order that was supposed to be collected yesterday, but Mrs. Patterson's husband took ill and she said she would come today." "Well, today is too late," Horace replied. "I have already rented the room to the new bank clerk. He pays twice what you were paying and he pays on time." Dolores looked around the street, feeling the weight of curious stares from townspeople who had stopped their daily routines to watch her humiliation. Some looked sympathetic, others merely curious, and a few seemed to enjoy the spectacle. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and now homeless in a town where respectable women without family were viewed with suspicion at best and contempt at worst. Her parents had died of cholera when she was 17, leaving her with nothing but her mother's sewing machine and the skills she had learned at her side. She had made a modest living mending clothes, altering dresses, and occasionally making new garments for the wives of ranchers and merchants. It was not much, but it had been hers, and she had been proud of her independence. Now that independence seemed like foolishness. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Horace shrugged. "That is not my concern." "Perhaps you should have thought of that before you failed to pay your rent." A wagon rattled to a stop in the street behind her, and Dolores turned to see a tall man climbing down from the driver's seat. He was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the ends beneath his worn hat. His shirt was faded blue, his trousers dusty from the road, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life working hard and expecting nothing he had not earned himself. "Seems like a harsh punishment for being $3 short," the man said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as someone from further south, perhaps Texas or Oklahoma Territory. Horace turned to him with narrowed eyes. "This is none of your business, stranger." "Isaiah Collins," the man said, touching the brim of his hat but not removing it. "And you are right, it is none of my business, but I have never been good at minding my own business when I see something that sits wrong with me." "Well, you can just move along then," Horace said. "This matter is settled." Isaiah looked past Horace to Dolores, and she felt something shift in the air between them, something she could not name but felt nonetheless. His eyes were a striking shade of green, unusual and arresting, and they held a kindness that made her throat tighten. "You a seamstress?" he asked. "Yes," she managed. He glanced at the sewing machine, then back at her face. "Any good at it?" Despite everything, Dolores felt a flicker of pride. "The best in Lyndon." "That is not saying much," Horace muttered. Isaiah ignored him. "I run a cattle ranch about 15 miles north of here. Small operation, just me and 4 hired hands. We are always needing mending done, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, is getting too old to do all the work herself." She has been after me to find someone to help with the domestic tasks." Dolores stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Are you offering me work?" "I am offering you a position," Isaiah said. "Room and board plus wages. You would help Mrs. Chen with the household duties and do any sewing and mending that needs doing. The men are rough on their clothes, so there would be plenty of that." "Now wait just a minute," Horace sputtered. "You cannot just come into my town and your town." Isaiah turned to him with a raised eyebrow. "I was not aware that Lyndon belonged to you, Mr. Mendel. I thought Kansas was still part of the United States, where a man could offer honest work to someone in need of it." A few onlookers chuckled at that, and Horace's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "This woman owes me money." "How much?" $3 for the unpaid rent, plus another $2 for the inconvenience." "That is robbery," Dolores protested. "You said $3. $5 total," Horace insisted. Isaiah reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. He counted out $5 and held them out to Horace. "There, debt paid. Miss Bradford is free to go." Horace snatched the money, his expression caught between satisfaction and irritation at being outmaneuvered. "Fine, but she is your problem now." Isaiah turned back to Dolores with an easy smile. "If you are willing, I can load your things onto the wagon. We should leave soon if we want to make it back before dark." Dolores looked at the stranger who had just paid her debt and offered her salvation, and every cautious instinct she possessed screamed at her to be wary. She knew nothing about this man, nothing about his ranch or his character. For all she knew, she could be trading one difficult situation for something far worse. But as she looked around at the faces of the townspeople, at Horace Mendel's smug expression, at the room above the general store where she had spent so many lonely nights, she realized she had no real choice. She had nowhere else to go, no family to turn to, no prospects beyond hoping another landlord would rent to her, though word of her eviction would spread quickly in a town this size. "I would be grateful," she said quietly. Isaiah nodded and moved to pick up her sewing machine. He handled it carefully, as if he understood its value, and carried it to the wagon where he secured it with ropes to keep it from jostling on the rough road. Dolores followed with her carpetbag, which contained her few personal possessions. 2 changes of clothes, her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day, and a small wooden box that held her sewing supplies. As Isaiah helped her up onto the wagon seat, his hand was warm and steady on her elbow. She settled onto the hard wooden bench, smoothing her faded green dress as he walked around to the other side and climbed up beside her. "Thank you," she said as he took up the reins, "for what you did. I will work hard to repay you." "No need for that," Isaiah said, clicking to the horses. The wagon lurched into motion, and Dolores watched as Lyndon began to recede behind them. "Everyone needs help sometimes. I have been on the receiving end of kindness more than once in my life. Seems only right to pass it along when I can." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels, the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves, and the occasional call of a bird from the prairie grass that stretched endlessly in all directions. The landscape was beautiful in its starkness, all golden grass and blue sky, with the sun beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. "How long have you had your ranch?" Dolores asked, feeling the need to fill the silence with something. "For years," Isaiah said. "Saved up my wages from working cattle drives from Texas up to the railheads in Abilene and Dodge City. Did that for 6 years until I had enough to buy some land and start my own herd. It is not much yet, but it is mine." "That must be a good feeling," Dolores said. "Owning something that is yours." "It is," he agreed, "though it comes with its own worries. Droughts, cattle thieves, prices falling when you need to sell, but I would rather have worries about my own place than work for someone else my whole life. I understand that, Dolores said. When I was sewing for myself, even though the money was uncertain, it felt different than when I used to work in Mrs. Henderson's dress shop in Topeka. She paid regularly, but every stitch belonged to her, not me. How did you end up in Lyndon? After my parents died, I could not afford to stay in Topeka. Lyndon seemed like a place where I might make a living without so much competition. There was only one other seamstress, old Mrs. Wilkins, and she could barely see well enough to thread a needle. I thought I could build something there. What happened? Dolores sighed. Business was never as good as I hoped. The women in Lyndon are practical. They mend their own clothes when they can, and they only come to me for special occasions or alterations they cannot manage themselves. Some months were good, but others were lean. I fell behind on rent twice before, and Mr. Mendel warned me that if it happened again, he would have no choice. I thought I could make it work, but then 3 customers canceled orders in the same month and I could not catch up. Why did they cancel? She hesitated, then decided she might as well be honest. One said her husband thought I was too young and pretty to be trusted alone in their house for fittings. Another decided to order from a catalog instead. The third never gave a reason, just said she had changed her mind. But I heard through the gossip that her husband had made inappropriate comments to me at the general store, and she blamed me for it rather than him. Isaiah's jaw tightened. That is not fair. No, Dolores agreed, but it is the way things are. A woman alone is always suspect, always vulnerable to rumors and assumptions. I tried to be above reproach, to be professional and respectable, but it did not seem to matter. Well, you will not have that problem at the ranch, Isaiah said. Mrs. Chen runs a tight household, and the men know better than to step out of line. Any man who works for me treats women with respect, or he finds work elsewhere. You sound very certain of that. I am, he said firmly. My mother raised me and my 3 sisters by herself after my father died in the war. I saw how hard her life was, how men would try to take advantage of her or treat her poorly because she had no husband to defend her. I learned early that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who have less power than he does. Dolores felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a feeling she had not experienced in a long time. Hope, perhaps, or the beginning of trust. Your mother sounds like a strong woman. She was, Isaiah said, and the past tense told Dolores all she needed to know. She died 2 years ago, fever. My sisters are all married now, settled in Texas with families of their own. I came north because I wanted to make my own way, not live in the shadow of the past. I am sorry for your loss, Dolores said softly. Thank you. And I am sorry about your parents. Losing family is hard, no matter how it happens. They fell into a more comfortable silence after that, and Dolores found herself studying Isaiah from the corner of her eye. He had strong, capable hands on the reins, and his profile showed a straight nose and a firm jawline. He was handsome, she admitted to herself, but more than that, he seemed decent. And decency was a rare enough quality that she had learned to value it above all else. The sun was low on the horizon when they finally turned onto a narrow track that led through a gate made of rough-hewn wood. The ranch spread out before them, modest but well-maintained. There was a sturdy house built of wood with a covered porch, a large barn, a bunkhouse for the hired hands, and several corrals where horses and cattle moved lazily in the evening light. As the wagon approached the house, a small figure emerged from the door and stood on the porch, shading her eyes against the sun. As they drew closer, Dolores could see it was an older woman, Chinese, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and wearing a simple cotton dress with an apron. "That is Mrs. Chen," Isaiah said. "She came to Kansas with her husband to work on the railroad, but he died in an accident. She needed work, and I needed someone who could cook and keep house. We have worked well together these past 3 years." He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then came around to help Dolores descend. His hands were gentle but strong as he lifted her down, and she felt a flutter in her stomach that she tried to ignore. Mrs. Chen approached with quick, efficient steps, her dark eyes taking in Dolores with an assessing look that missed nothing. "Who is this, Mr. Collins?" "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Dolores Bradford. She is a seamstress, and I have hired her to help you with the household work and to handle the mending and sewing. Miss Bradford, this is Mrs. Chen, who keeps this place running smoothly despite my best efforts to create chaos." Mrs. Chen's stern expression softened into something that might have been amusement. "You give me too much credit, Mr. Collins. The chaos is not so bad." She turned to Dolores and extended her hand. "Welcome, Miss Bradford. I hope Mr. Collins explained that this is a working ranch. The days are long and the work is hard." "He did," Dolores said, shaking the older woman's hand. "And I am grateful for the opportunity. I will work hard, I promise you." Mrs. Chen nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good. Come, I will show you to your room. It is not much, but it is clean and private." Isaiah began unloading Dolores's belongings from the wagon while Mrs. Chen led her into the house. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area, a fireplace made of river stone, and furniture that was handmade but sturdy. A hallway led to the back of the house where there were 3 doors. "Mr. Collins has his room there," Mrs. Chen said, pointing to the door on the left. "Mine is here in the middle, and this one will be yours." She opened the door on the right to reveal a small room with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the prairie. "It is perfect," Dolores said, and she meant it. The room was small, but it was clean and private, more than she had dared hope for. "Good. You rest today. Tomorrow you start work. Breakfast is at 5:30 before the men go out to the range. You will help me prepare it and clean up after. Then there is bread to make, washing to do, vegetables to tend in the garden. In the afternoon you can work on mending. The men bring their torn clothes every Monday, and there is always a pile waiting." "I can do all of that," Dolores said. "We will see, Mrs. Chen said, but there was no malice in her tone, just the practicality of someone who had learned not to take anyone at their word until they had proven themselves. Isaiah appeared in the doorway with Dolores's sewing machine, and Mrs. Chen directed him to set it in the corner of the room where the light from the window would fall on it during the day. He handled it carefully, then went back for her carpet bag. When he returned, he paused in the doorway. "I should have asked before, but you are not running from anything, are you?" "No husband or family looking for you, no," Dolores said. "I have no one. I am exactly what I appear to be, a seamstress who fell on hard times," he nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good. I will leave you to settle in. Supper is in an hour, nothing fancy, just stew and bread, but Mrs. Chen is the best cook in Kansas. You only say that because you have not tasted anyone else's cooking in 3 years," Mrs. Chen said tartly, but Dolores could see the pleased expression on her face. After they left, Dolores sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long breath. The events of the day felt surreal, like something from a story rather than her actual life. This morning, she had woken in her familiar room in Lyndon, worried but still clinging to hope that she might find a way to pay her rent. Now she was on a ranch 15 miles away, in the home of a man she had just met, about to begin a life she could never have imagined. She should have been terrified, but instead, she felt something closer to relief. Whatever happened next, she would face it. She had survived worse, and she would survive this too. Dolores stood and unpacked her carpetbag, hanging her 2 dresses on hooks behind the door and placing her mother's Bible on the small table beside the bed. She set the daguerreotype on the dresser and opened the wooden box of sewing supplies, running her fingers over the spools of thread and the carefully organized needles. This was who she was, a seamstress, a woman who took scraps and made them into something useful and beautiful. She would do the same with this new life. Supper that evening was indeed stew and bread, served at a long wooden table in the main room. The 4 hired hands joined them. 2 brothers named Jack and Thomas Murphy, a quiet man called Samuel who seemed to be in his 40s, and a young man barely out of his teens named Peter who could not stop staring at Dolores until Jack elbowed him in the ribs. The men were polite but curious, asking Dolores careful questions about where she came from and what had brought her to the ranch. Isaiah seemed to sense her discomfort and smoothly redirected the conversation to the work that needed to be done in the coming weeks. Fences to be mended, cattle to be moved to fresh pasture, preparations for the fall roundup when they would separate out the steers to be sold. Dolores mostly listened, learning the rhythm of their speech and the dynamics between them. Jack seemed to be the unofficial leader of the hired hands, older and more experienced than the others. Thomas deferred to his brother but had his own quiet competence. Samuel spoke little but watched everything, and Peter was eager and clumsy, trying hard to prove himself. After supper, the men returned to the bunkhouse while Dolores helped Mrs. Chen clean up. They worked in comfortable silence, washing dishes in water heated on the stove and putting away the leftover food. "Mr. Collins is a good man," Mrs. Chen said after a while. "He treats his workers fairly, pays on time, does not drink to excess or gamble. This is a good place to work." "I can see that," Dolores said. "He is lonely, though," Mrs. Chen continued. "He works hard, but he is alone too much. A man his age should have a wife, children, but he says he is too busy building the ranch to think about such things." Dolores felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the dim light from the oil lamps. "Perhaps he has not met the right woman." "Perhaps," Mrs. Chen said, "or perhaps he needed the right woman to come to him." Before Dolores could respond to that pointed comment, Isaiah came in from checking on the horses. "Everything settled, Miss Bradford?" "Yes, thank you, and please call me Dolores." "Dolores," he said, as if testing the name. "Then you should call me Isaiah. We do not stand on much ceremony out here." "Isaiah," she repeated and liked the way it sounded. "I will leave you ladies to your evening," he said. "Dolores, if you need anything, just let Mrs. Chen know. Tomorrow will be a full day." After he left, Mrs. Chen gave Dolores a knowing look, but said nothing more. They finished the dishes and bid each other good night, and Dolores retreated to her small room. She lay in bed that night listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the creak of the house settling. Through the thin wall she could hear Mrs. Chen's soft snoring, and from somewhere further away, the low murmur of men's voices from the bunkhouse. She thought about Isaiah Collins, about his green eyes and gentle hands, about the way he had stood up to Horace Mendel without hesitation. She thought about how he had paid her debt without being asked, how he had offered her not just work but dignity. It would be easy to fall for a man like that, she thought. Too easy. She would have to be careful. She had learned long ago that depending on others led only to disappointment. But as she drifted off to sleep, she could not quite suppress the small spark of hope that had taken root in her chest. The next few weeks fell into a steady rhythm. Dolores rose before dawn each day to help Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for the men. She learned to make strong coffee, to fry eggs and salt pork, to bake bread and biscuits. After breakfast, there was always cleaning to be done, and in the afternoons, when the heat was at its worst, she would sit in her room or on the porch with her sewing. The mending pile was indeed endless. She patched torn trousers, replaced buttons, reinforced seams weakened by hard work and rough treatment. But she also took on more creative projects. When she noticed that Isaiah's only good shirt was wearing thin at the collar and cuffs, she offered to make him a new one. He protested that it was not necessary, but she insisted, and he finally agreed. She took his measurements one evening after supper, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled slightly as she held the measuring tape around his shoulders and chest. He stood patiently, answering her questions about sleeve length and collar style, and she was acutely aware of his warmth, his scent of leather and sun and honest sweat. "You do not have to do this," he said. "You have plenty of other work." "I want to," she said. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing. Let me do this." She worked on the shirt in her spare moments, choosing a dark blue fabric from the supplies Isaiah brought back from Lyndon on his next trip to town. She put extra care into every stitch, making the collar and cuffs reinforced but comfortable, adding small details that would not be immediately visible but that she knew were there. French seams that would not fray, buttonholes worked in a tight, precise stitch that would not pull loose. When she presented it to him 2 weeks later, he was speechless. He held it up, examining the workmanship, then looked at her with something in his eyes that made her heart race. "This is fine work," he said quietly. "Better than anything I could buy in a store." "I am glad you like it," she managed. He wore it the following Sunday when they all rode into Lyndon for church, and Dolores felt an absurd pride seeing him in something she had made. Several women commented on the shirt, and when they learned she had sewn it, they began approaching her with requests for work. "I could make you a new dress, Mrs. Patterson," one woman said. "My daughter's wedding is in October and I need something special." "And I have been needing curtains for the parlor," another added. "Could you do that?" Dolores glanced at Isaiah, uncertain. She had been hired to work on the ranch, not to take on outside commissions, but he nodded encouragingly. "If you want to take on extra work in your free time, that is up to you," he said. "Any money you make is yours to keep." So Dolores began building a new business, this time from a position of security rather than desperation. She took on commissions in the evenings and on Sundays, and the money she earned went into a small wooden box she kept under her bed. It was not much, but it was hers, and it represented the possibility of a future she had not dared imagine. As summer turned to fall, Dolores found herself settling into ranch life in ways she had not expected. She learned to help Mrs. Chen preserve vegetables from the garden, to make soap, to manage the seemingly endless tasks required to keep a household running. She learned the names of all the cattle, or at least the ones that had distinguishing features, and she learned to recognize the different horses by sight. Most of all, she learned about Isaiah Collins. She learned that he was patient and fair, that he never asked his men to do anything he would not do himself. She learned that he had a quiet sense of humor that emerged at unexpected moments, making her laugh even on the hardest days. She learned that he was generous to a fault, sharing what he had with those who had less, even when it meant going without himself. She learned that he had a beautiful voice and sometimes sang while he worked, old ballads and church hymns that carried across the prairie in the evening air. She learned that he read books in the evening by lamplight, histories and adventure stories borrowed from the small library in Lyndon. She learned that he missed his family but never spoke of going back to Texas, as if he had made a decision to build his life here and would not waver from it. And she learned that she was falling in love with him, slowly but inexorably, like water wearing away stone. She tried to fight it. She told herself she was being foolish, that he had hired her as an employee and saw her as nothing more. She reminded herself that she had been fooled by kind gestures before, that men who seemed decent could reveal themselves to be otherwise. She tried to maintain a professional distance, to keep their interactions polite but impersonal. But it was hard when he looked at her the way he did, as if she were someone worth seeing. It was hard when he asked her opinion on matters large and small, from what color paint to use on the barn to whether they should plant wheat in the south field. It was hard when he made sure she had everything she needed, from lamp oil for her late-night sewing to a new winter coat when the weather turned cold. It was especially hard when she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something tender and yearning and carefully restrained. The turning point came in late October, on a cold evening when the first snow of the season was beginning to fall. Dolores had been working on a wedding dress for Mrs. Patterson's daughter, and she was struggling with a particularly difficult section of lace that needed to be attached to the bodice. Her eyes were tired from close work in the lamplight, and her fingers were stiff from the cold. There was a soft knock on her door, and she called, "Come in." Isaiah entered carrying a cup of tea, steam rising in the cool air. "Mrs. Chen said you had been working for hours and might need this." "That was kind of her," Dolores said, accepting the cup gratefully, "and kind of you to bring it." He lingered in the doorway, looking at the partially completed dress spread across her bed. "That is beautiful. It will be when it is finished. Right now it is just frustrating. May I?" He gestured to the chair beside her sewing table, and she nodded. He sat, and they were quiet for a moment, the only sound the tick of the clock on her dresser and the wind rattling the window panes. "I wanted to thank you," Isaiah said finally, "for everything you have done these past months. Mrs. Chen says you are the best help she has ever had, and the men are always commenting on how nice it is to have their clothes mended so well. You have made a real difference here." "I am grateful for the opportunity," Dolores said. "You saved me that day in Lyndon. I do not know what would have become of me if you had not come along." "You would have figured something out," he said. "You are resourceful and strong. You would have survived." "Maybe, but I would not have thrived. Here I feel like I have a purpose, like I am building something." "You are," he said. "The women in town are always talking about your sewing. They say you are the most talented seamstress they have ever seen." Dolores felt herself blush. "They are being kind." "No, they are being honest." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "Dolores, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to beat faster. "What is it?" "When I saw you in Lyndon that day, standing in the street with your sewing machine, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. It was not just pity or a desire to help. It was something more. I told myself I was offering you work because I needed the help, because it was the right thing to do. But that was not the whole truth." "What was the whole truth?" she asked, barely breathing. "The whole truth is that from the moment I saw you, I wanted to know you. I wanted to talk to you, to learn who you were, to see if the strength I saw in your eyes was real or just my imagination." He met her gaze, his green eyes intense. "And these past months have shown me that it was real. You are real. And I have fallen in love with you, Dolores Bradford, even though I know I have no right to say so." Dolores set down her teacup with shaking hands. "Why do you think you have no right?" "Because I am your employer. Because you came here out of necessity, not choice. Because I do not want you to feel obligated to return feelings you do not have, simply because I have provided you with work and shelter." "Isaiah," she said softly, "do you really think I am the kind of woman who would pretend to feel something I do not?" "No," he admitted. "But I also know that gratitude can be confused with deeper feelings, and I would not want you to mistake one for the other." She stood and crossed to where he sat, then took his hands in hers. They were warm and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard and honestly. "I am grateful to you," she said. "That is true. But gratitude is not what I feel when I see you in the mornings and my heart lifts. Gratitude is not what I feel when I hear you singing and have to stop myself from going to find you just to be near you. Gratitude is not what keeps me awake at night, thinking about your smile and your voice and the way you make me feel safe and valued and seen." "Dolores," he breathed. "I love you, Isaiah Collins," she said. "I have tried to be sensible and practical and protect my heart. But it seems my heart has a mind of its own, and it belongs to you." He stood so quickly the chair nearly tipped over, and then his arms were around her, and he was holding her close, his face buried in her hair. She could feel his heart racing against her chest, could feel the tremor in his hands as he held her. "I love you," he said again, pulling back just enough to look at her face. "I love you so much. I have wanted to tell you for weeks, but I was afraid." "What were you afraid of?" "That you would say no, that you would leave, that I would lose you before I ever really had you." "You have me," she whispered. "If you want me, if I want you," he laughed, a sound full of joy and relief. "Dolores, wanting you is all I have been able to think about, but I need you to be sure. I need you to know that this is not just about security or gratitude. If you marry me, I want it to be because you choose me, because you want to build a life with me, not because you feel you owe me something." "Marry you?" Her eyes widened. He cupped her face in his hands. "Yes, marry me. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I also know that I will never feel about anyone else the way I feel about you. I want you to be my wife, Dolores. I want to build this ranch with you, to grow old with you, to have children with you if we are so blessed. But only if that is what you want too." She felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of happiness, not sorrow. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Dolores felt as if her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it. This man, this good and decent man, loved her and wanted her, not despite her circumstances, but because of who she was. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. "We should tell Mrs. Chen," Dolores said. "She already knows," Isaiah said. "She told me 2 weeks ago that I was an idiot if I did not propose to you soon." Dolores laughed. "She said nothing to me. She is wise enough to let people figure things out for themselves, but I have no doubt she will be very pleased when we tell her." They went together to Mrs. Chen's room and knocked softly. She answered in her nightgown and robe, her gray hair in a long braid, and took one look at their faces before smiling. "About time," she said. "I will make a special breakfast tomorrow to celebrate." The next few weeks were a flurry of activity. Dolores finished the wedding dress for Mrs. Patterson's daughter and then began work on her own. A simple but elegant gown in ivory silk that she had been saving for a special occasion. Mrs. Chen helped her with the fitting, and the older woman's eyes were suspiciously bright as she pinned the hem. They were married in the small church in Lyndon on a cold November morning, with Mrs. Chen, the hired hands, and a handful of townspeople in attendance. Dolores wore her ivory silk dress and carried a bouquet of dried wildflowers that Peter had shyly presented to her that morning. Isaiah wore the blue shirt she had made him, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They exchanged vows before God and witnesses, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache, and she knew she had found her home. The reception was held at the ranch, with Mrs. Chen's cooking drawing praise from everyone who attended. There was dancing to music provided by Jack Murphy on his fiddle and Samuel on a harmonica that Dolores had not known he possessed. Even Mrs. Chen danced, letting Thomas spin her around the floor while everyone clapped and cheered. As the sun set and their guests began to depart, Isaiah took Dolores's hand and led her out onto the porch. The prairie stretched out before them, vast and beautiful in the fading light, and she leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body beside hers. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said. "Good. Because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way." That night, in the room that was now theirs, Isaiah made love to her with a gentleness and reverence that brought tears to her eyes. He worshipped her body as if it were something precious, learning what made her gasp and sigh, bringing her pleasure she had never imagined. And when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, both of them breathing hard and sated, Dolores felt as if she had come home to a place she had been searching for her entire life. The winter that followed was hard in the way that all Kansas winters were hard, with blizzards that kept them housebound for days and temperatures that plunged so low the water in the basins froze solid overnight. But Dolores had never been happier. She woke each morning beside the man she loved, worked alongside Mrs. Chen to keep the household running, and spent her evenings sewing or reading or simply talking with Isaiah about everything and nothing. They learned each other in those long winter months, learning how to navigate the small disagreements that arose between any two people sharing a life. Isaiah learned that Dolores needed time alone to recharge after busy days, and Dolores learned that Isaiah processed his worries by talking through them rather than sitting with them in silence. They learned to communicate, to compromise, to apologize when they were wrong and forgive when they were wronged. By the time spring arrived, they had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Dolores continued to take on sewing commissions from the women in Lyndon and the surrounding ranches, and the money she earned went into a savings account at the bank that Isaiah insisted be in her name alone. "I never want you to feel trapped," he said when she protested. "I want you to have your own money, your own independence. I want you to stay with me because you choose to, not because you have to." It was typical of him, this concern for her autonomy and dignity, and she loved him all the more for it. In May, Dolores realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week, then another, before finally confiding in Mrs. Chen. The older woman's face lit up. "A baby, this is wonderful news." "I have not told Isaiah yet," Dolores said. "I wanted to be sure." "You are sure now?" "I think so. I feel different. Tired and queasy in the mornings, and my body feels strange." "Tell him," Mrs. Chen urged. "He will be so happy." That evening, after supper, Dolores asked Isaiah to walk with her. They strolled out past the barn to the small rise where they could see the cattle grazing in the distance and the sun setting over the prairie. "I have something to tell you," she said. He turned to her with concern. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Something is very, very right." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment he just stared at her, as if he could not quite comprehend the words. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to Lyndon. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down again with a worried expression. "Should I be doing that? Is it safe?" she laughed. "I am pregnant, not made of glass, but maybe save the spinning for after the baby is born." He pulled her close, resting his hand on her stomach with a look of wonder. "A baby, our baby, Dolores, I cannot believe it. I am going to be a father." "And I am going to be a mother," she said, feeling the weight and joy of that truth settling over her. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite the summer heat. Dolores continued to work, though Mrs. Chen and Isaiah both fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and do less. She took on fewer sewing commissions as her body grew larger, and her fingers began to swell in the heat, but she still spent her evenings preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny gowns and blankets, embroidering them with delicate patterns of flowers and birds. Isaiah built a cradle from oak, sanding it smooth and carving their initials into the headboard. Mrs. Chen knitted little caps and booties, her needles clicking away in the evenings as they all sat together in the main room. In December, on a night when the first real snow of the season was falling, Dolores felt the first pangs of labor. Mrs. Chen sent Peter racing to Lyndon to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Garrett, who had delivered half the babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Isaiah paced the main room, wearing a path in the floorboards and jumping at every sound from the bedroom. Mrs. Chen moved between the two rooms, bringing water and clean cloths and reassuring words. Finally, just as the sun was setting on the second day, the sharp cry of a newborn filled the house. Mrs. Garrett emerged from the bedroom with a tired but triumphant smile. "You have a son, Mr. Collins, a healthy boy with a fine set of lungs." Isaiah rushed past her into the bedroom where Dolores lay exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. He approached slowly, as if afraid he might break the spell, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, and he was the most beautiful thing Isaiah had ever seen. "He is perfect," Isaiah whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his, gripping tight, and Isaiah felt tears stream down his face. "He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Dolores asked. They had discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Isaiah knew exactly what he wanted to call him. "James," he said. "After my father, James Isaiah Collins." "James," Dolores repeated, smiling. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The baby yawned, a comically wide expression on his tiny face, and both parents laughed through their tears. The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Dolores and Isaiah took turns walking him when he cried, learning to interpret his different sounds and needs. Mrs. Chen, who had seemed immune to sentiment, proved to be completely smitten with the baby and could often be found rocking him and singing Chinese lullabies when she thought no one was watching. Even the hired hands were charmed by little James. Jack carved him a wooden horse, Thomas made him a set of blocks, Samuel whittled a rattle, and Peter appointed himself the baby's official guardian, hovering anxiously whenever James so much as sneezed. As James grew from a tiny infant to a chubby baby who could sit up and then crawl, Dolores watched Isaiah become the father she had always known he would be. Patient and loving, firm but gentle, endlessly fascinated by every milestone their son achieved. The ranch prospered during those years. Isaiah's careful management and hard work paid off in increasing herd sizes and better prices at market. He was able to hire 2 more hands and expand the house, adding a proper nursery for James and a larger room for him and Dolores. Dolores's sewing business continued to thrive as well. She took on special commissions now, creating wedding dresses and fine gowns for the wealthier families in the region. Her reputation spread, and sometimes people came from as far as Topeka to commission work from her. When James was 2 years old, Dolores discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier. And in the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret Rose, called Maggie, after Dolores's mother. Maggie was different from James from the start. Where he had been placid and easy, she was fierce and demanding. She came into the world screaming her displeasure and seemed determined to make her presence known at all times. But she had Dolores's dark eyes and Isaiah's stubborn chin, and they loved her completely. 2 years after Maggie came another son, Thomas William, called Tommy, who was sweet-natured and gentle. And 2 years after that, their youngest, a daughter named Sarah Ann, who seemed to be a perfect blend of all her siblings. James's calm nature, Maggie's determination, and Tommy's sweetness. With 4 children, the house was never quiet. There was always someone needing something, always a scraped knee to bandage, or a dispute to settle, or a story to be told at bedtime. But Dolores had never been happier. This loud, chaotic, loving family was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared to hope for. Mrs. Chen, who had become like a grandmother to the children, finally retired when Sarah was born, saying she was too old to keep up with 4 little ones. But she stayed on the ranch, living in a small cottage Isaiah built for her near the main house, and she spent her days spoiling the children and teaching them to speak Chinese and cooking the special treats that had them all clustering around her kitchen. The years passed in a beautiful blur. James grew tall and serious, taking after his father in his love of the land and the cattle. Maggie was bright and stubborn, insisting that she could do anything her brothers could do and usually proving it. Tommy was the peacemaker, the one who could settle disputes and make everyone laugh. And Sarah, the baby, was curious about everything, always asking questions and exploring. Dolores continued to sew, though now her work was as much about teaching her daughters as it was about earning money. Maggie showed little interest in needlework, preferring to follow her father and brothers around the ranch. But Sarah loved the sewing machine and would sit for hours watching Dolores work, asking questions about every stitch and technique. Isaiah's hair began to show threads of silver at his temples, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Dolores, he was as handsome as the day he had loaded her sewing machine onto his wagon and changed her life forever. They still took walks in the evenings when they could steal time away from the children, strolling out to watch the sunset and talk about their day. Sometimes they talked about serious things, the children's education, the ranch's finances, their hopes and worries. Sometimes they talked about nothing at all, content simply to be together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaiah surprised Dolores with a gift. A brand new sewing machine, the latest model with all the modern improvements. She cried when she saw it, thinking of the old singer that had sat beside her in the street in Lyndon all those years ago. "What happened to my old machine?" she asked. She had stopped using it years ago when Isaiah had bought her a newer model, and she realized she had not thought about it in ages. "It is in the barn," Isaiah said. "I could not bring myself to get rid of it. That machine brought you to me." She kissed him then, there in front of the children who made exaggerated sounds of disgust, and she felt the same flutter in her stomach she had felt the first time he kissed her. "I love you," she said. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you," he said, "every day more than the day before." As the children grew older, Dolores and Isaiah watched with pride as they became the people they were meant to be. James, at 18, took on more and more responsibility for running the ranch, and it was clear he would take over when Isaiah was ready to step back. Maggie, at 16, shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to become a doctor, and Isaiah and Dolores supported her dream even as others in Lyndon shook their heads at the impropriety of it. Tommy, at 14, showed a gift for music and could play the fiddle even better than Jack Murphy. And Sarah, at 12, had become as skilled a seamstress as her mother, creating intricate embroidery and delicate lacework that drew admiration from everyone who saw it. The ranch had grown prosperous enough that Isaiah was able to send Maggie to medical school in Kansas City, a decision that caused some controversy in Lyndon, but that he never questioned. His daughter had a dream, and he would do everything in his power to help her achieve it. When Maggie left for school, Dolores cried for a week, missing her fierce, stubborn daughter. But she was also proud beyond measure, knowing that Maggie would make a difference in the world. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep the following winter, at the age of 78. The whole family mourned her, and they buried her in the small cemetery outside Lyndon with a headstone that read, "Beloved friend and grandmother, she built a home with love and hard work." More years passed, bringing joy and sorrow in equal measure as life always does. Tommy married a girl from Lyndon named Elizabeth and brought her to live on the ranch. Sarah, to everyone's surprise, fell in love with Peter, who had remained on the ranch all these years and had grown from a clumsy boy into a capable and kind man. They were married in the same church where Dolores and Isaiah had spoken their vows, and Dolores made Sarah's wedding dress, putting all her love and skill into every stitch. James married a rancher's daughter from the next county, a practical woman named Catherine who fit seamlessly into ranch life. And Maggie, after finishing medical school, returned to Lyndon to open a practice, becoming the first female doctor in the region and eventually marrying a fellow physician she had met during her training. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with noise and laughter once again. Dolores taught them all to sew, just as she had taught her own children, and Isaiah taught them to ride and rope and care for the cattle. They were a dynasty now, a family built on love and hard work and the decision a young cowboy had made long ago to help a woman in need. On a warm evening in June 1908, 30 years after that fateful day in Lyndon, Dolores and Isaiah sat on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie they had made their home. They were older now, their hair gone gray, their movements slower, but the love between them was as strong as ever. "Do you ever think about that day?" Dolores asked. "When you found me in the street with my sewing machine?" "Every day," Isaiah said, taking her hand. "It was the best day of my life, even though I did not know it at the time." "I was so scared," she admitted. "I thought I was getting into the wagon with a stranger, that I might be making a terrible mistake." "And were you making a mistake?" she laughed. "The best mistake I ever made. Though it was not really a mistake, was it? It was fate. It was meant to be." "I saw you standing there," Isaiah said, "and I knew. I cannot explain how, but I knew that you were going to be important to me, that you were going to change my life." "We changed each other's lives," Dolores said. "You saved me and I saved you right back." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to purple. Around them, the ranch hummed with life. Cattle lowing, horses nickering, the distant sound of their grandchildren playing in the yard. Inside the house, they could hear Tommy's fiddle and Sarah's laughter, the clatter of dishes as the family gathered for supper. "We built something good here," Isaiah said. "Something that will last." "We did," Dolores agreed. And it all started with a sewing machine and a wagon and a man who was kind enough to help a stranger. "And a woman who was brave enough to accept that help," Isaiah added. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture he had made countless times over the years, but that still made her heart flutter. They stood together and walked into the house where their family waited, where supper was on the table and love filled every corner. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the inevitable changes that time brings. Isaiah's health began to fail as he entered his 70s, his strong body finally showing the wear of decades of hard work. Dolores cared for him tenderly, just as he had always cared for her, and James took over the running of the ranch completely. When Isaiah died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, Dolores mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been given 35 years of marriage, years filled with love and laughter and purpose. They had raised 4 children who had become good, kind adults. They had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, sewing until her fingers grew too stiff to hold a needle. She told stories about their grandfather to the youngest grandchildren, making sure they knew what kind of man he had been. Generous and kind, strong and gentle, someone who had seen a woman in need and had not hesitated to help. Dolores lived to be 82 years old, and when she passed away in the spring of 1920, she was buried beside Isaiah in the Lyndon cemetery. Her headstone read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she created beauty with every stitch." At her funeral, Sarah stood before the gathered family and friends and told the story of how her parents had met, how a cowboy had loaded a seamstress and her sewing machine onto his wagon, and in doing so had created a love story for the ages. "They taught us that love is not just about passion or romance," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "It is about kindness and respect. It is about choosing each other every day, even when times are hard. It is about building something together that lasts." The old Singer sewing machine, the one that had sat beside Dolores in the street in Lyndon all those years ago, was given to Sarah. She restored it carefully and placed it in a place of honor in her home, and when her own grandchildren asked about it, she would tell them the story of the seamstress and the cowboy, who had created a family legacy from nothing but love and hard work. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management, and eventually under his sons after him. The Collins family became one of the most respected in the region, known for their integrity and their kindness, for the way they treated their workers fairly, and gave generously to those in need. And sometimes, on warm summer evenings, when the wind blew just right across the prairie, people swore they could hear the sound of fiddle music and laughter coming from the old ranch house, as if the love that had been built there so many years ago still lingered in the very air, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and choosing to help a stranger on a dusty street in a small Kansas town. The story of Dolores Bradford and Isaiah Collins became the stuff of family legend, passed down through generations, as an example of what was possible when 2 people met at exactly the right moment and chose love over fear, compassion over indifference. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change the entire course of a life, that what seems like an ending can be a beginning, and that true love is built not in grand gestures, but in the thousands of small choices we make every single day to see each other, to value each other, and to build something lasting together. Their great-great-grandchildren still live in Kansas, some on the ranch that Isaiah built and Dolores made a home, others scattered across the state and beyond. But they all carry the story with them, the tale of the seamstress who was evicted with her sewing machine and the cowboy who loaded it onto his wagon along with her, not knowing that in doing so he was loading up his entire future, his whole heart, and the beginning of a love that would echo through the generations long after both of them had turned to dust beneath the endless Kansas sky.